Welcome to this side event with the title How to Address the Issue of Political Prisoners in the OSCE Participating States. My name is Bjørn Engesland, and I'm the Secretary General of the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, one of the main human rights organizations in Norway, established back in 1977, born out of the Helsinki process. We have a main focus on monitoring and documenting serious human rights violations, cooperating closely with a huge number of human rights groups and defenders throughout Europe and the OSCE area. This side event focus on the problem of political prisoners in the OSCE area. Political imprisonment remains widespread in several of the OSCE participating states. Our speakers in the panel that I will shortly introduce to you will present recent developments concerning political prisoners in some of the OSCE states, including Russia, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. There will also be comments on developments in other OSCE participating states concerning weakening of safeguards for fair trials and increased political control over the judiciary. We will try to have a focus on proposing concrete measures and ideas on how the OSCE and its participating states can deal with the problem. So to some extent we are playing into your work with our ideas. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the side event that will last until 1:30 sharp. Let me quickly introduce the panel. To my left, Gunnar Ekelöv, Head of Policies from the Norwegian Helsinki Committee. He will speak on the subject of the concept of political prisoners and give an overview of the situation, a kind of an introduction. And then, Vladimir Kara-Murza, a well-known Russian opposition politician and Vice President of Free Russia Foundation. You will describe the current situation in Russia today. That will also be the subject to some extent of Maria Eisman, Russian lawyer, who will present her work in a practical sense defending political prisoners in Russia today. To the right, Olga Shamshul-Frydal, Senior Advisor, also of the Norwegian Helsinki Committee. She will describe the situation in Azerbaijan, followed by Ilya Nusov from the FIDH, International Federation for Human Rights, Europe and Central Asia Desk Director, that will present some of the main issues in Central Asia today. Before I give the floor to Gunnar, I would very much like to thank the delegates from the Lithuanian delegation that are the host here for the side event. Mrs. Ruta Milute, head of the Lithuanian delegation, and Vladinas Kashulas, something like that, also from the Lithuanian delegation. We are very grateful to the two of you for your kind cooperation and willingness to host this event. And first then, I give the floor to Ruta Milute, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues. I want to thank, first of all, everyone for using your precious time to come here to this event. I want to thank you for the Norwegian Helsinki Committee for bringing up the topic and the permanent representation of Lithuania and the OSCE for helping to organize the event. OSCE is promoting the full respect of human rights and fundamental freedoms, but some of the OSCE participating states, as was already mentioned, are failing to ensure them. It is widely known that in countries such as Russia, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, there are issues freedoms of expression, association, and assembly are often limited, there is pressure and persecution on human rights and political activists, restrictions on NGOs exist, media censorship as well that is there, and the rise of number of political prisoners is alarming. International community attention usually is prompted to high-profile cases, but it is often lacking attention to the less-known cases as well. It is important not only to state the problem, but to look for the measures and ideas how to address it properly. That's the main goal of this plan. I believe it is crucial to maintain political pressure on countries to fully comply with international human rights standards. Continue to call to release all illegally and arbitrarily detained. Call for the implementation of decisions of the European Court of Human Rights regarding violation of human rights of state persons. Of course, to unite our efforts in highlighting the names of all political prisoners arbitrarily detained and making their cases on the table until they are freed. We have to continue to support efforts of human rights activists and react timely to their calls for preventative action as well. Seeing the list of the panelists, I don't want to take much of the time. I would like to conclude quoting from the report of murder of Boris Nemtsov that was presented here yesterday. It was saying that murder of a politician is not only devastating for the loved ones, but it's also an attack on the democracy. To rephrase this, I believe that the issue of political prisoners is not only silencing the ones who are unwanted in the country, but it's also a big threat to democracy as a whole, because it's also silencing a much bigger community. I want to wish everyone a fruitful discussion, and I hope that in the end we will have ideas and plans for the next meetings, how to address the issue of political prisoners in the OSCE Participating States. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much again. We move on to the presentations from our panel. I have asked them to try to keep, not to speak more than 7 minutes each, in order for you also to have a chance to ask questions and make your comments. Thank you. Gunnar Eklund Skydal, Norwegian State Committee, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I'm very happy to see that so many have attended this side event. I think during these 2 days in Hofburg, I have heard 4 categories of problems when it comes to political activities, which, as you all know, is protected by international law. It's harassment, different types of harassment against opposition politicians. It's political imprisonment, which is the theme of this side event. We have even heard about political killings, which could be said is the most serious violation of human rights that we are talking about related to political activities. We had the Nemtsov report presented yesterday, which is a very serious case, also for the OSCE, I would argue. And then you have the problem of political refugees, which are those who were able to leave the country because of political persecution, and who often think that they are safe in countries in the western parts of Europe or Northern America, but who still experience that those who persecuted them in their home countries are able to actively make their life hard through arrest warrants or red alerts or through the Interpol and other measures. So it's a whole range of issues related to the problem of lack of political freedoms. When it comes to the definition of political prisoners that we base this discussion on, we take the definition by the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly, which was endorsed by the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly some years ago. And based on that definition, it's not only political active persons who should be considered political prisoners, but also those who were imprisoned in violation of human rights rights guarantees, fair trial guarantees, due process. So if you, for instance, look at the situation in Russia, I think we should also include the majority on the list of the Memorial Human Rights Organization, which is the religiously active persons. We had very brutal cases of Jehovah's Witnesses who are not politically active at all, but who are sent to prison for long terms. So at the heart of this definition, it's the violation of the human rights. It's in prison which last unproportionately long, and of course also those who are imprisoned on trumped up charges, who didn't do any wrong and hence are in prison. So how is the situation in the OSCE area when it comes to political imprisonments? I think it's a worrying tendency that in some countries the list of political prisoners is actually increasing, and we will hear more about the situation in Russia, which sadly is an example of that. That list includes political opposition, Ukrainian activists, civil society activists, journalists, religious and ethnic minorities, LGBT persons, etc. There are more than 300 on the list of Memorial. And it seems that the list has been growing since Putin came back as president in 2012. In Uzbekistan, the situation, as we will hear from Yuso, is different. Actually, there are a lot of people who are released, who have been in prison for long terms on politically motivated charges. But as I also think we will hear, problems are not solved. There are a lot of people who remain in prison, and remember, when a political prisoner is released, the problem is not over, because that person has been unjustly put to prison for a long time, and there should be remedies to compensate and rehabilitate that person. Also in the other Central Asian states, the problem of political imprisonments remains. In Tajikistan, it becomes in particular acute in recent years, where the main opposition party have been banned and authorities imprison hundreds of opposition members on dubious charges, harassing their families and even attacking the lawyers. Also in Kazakhstan, there are numbers of political prisoners, and as we also will hear more about, waves of arrests of protesters. In Kyrgyzstan, and there are also very well-known cases of human rights defenders being imprisoned on dubious charges. We will also talk about the situation in Azerbaijan, where there also have been released of many human rights defenders, journalists, opposition activists, religious believers, but where there is a remaining problem and new arrests. A recent resolution by the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly reiterated that the problem of political prisoners in Azerbaijan needs to be solved. I want also to point to the situation in Turkey. After the 15 July 2016 coup attempt, there has been a purge which led to arrest and imprisonment of tens of thousands of people who had no proven link to the coup attempt. The government blamed the Gülen movement to be responsible for the coup attempt, and people with any link to that movement were deemed as members of a terrorist organization. The government also targeted people with alleged links with the outlawed PKK or dissenters of the Turkish government. Politicians and mayors of the pro-Kurdish HDP party, the third biggest party in Turkish parliament, were also arrested. Many journalists, academics, and human rights activists were put on trial and received long prison sentences. I think these developments in the named countries and also in some other countries exemplify worrying trends of increasing political control of the judiciary. Even in some EU member states, such as Hungary and Poland, governments initiated legislation and nomination procedures unduly increase such control. We have started to create something we call Democrats' Toolbox to fight political imprisonment. Because as I said, this is a democratic problem, and it should be seen at the heart of what the OSCE is about, to address the issue of political imprisonment. So you all see the picture of Ayub Titiyev, which we chose to exemplify the problem. He was a human rights activist in Chechnya, arrested some 2 years ago, because the police alleged that he had a package of marijuana in his car. And I know this guy quite well. He is a religious man, he's not drinking, he's not smoking, and he's not using marijuana. That's for sure. He was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment. He was released last year, but he should never have been in prison. And I think the whole operation was to scare people from working for human rights. As an example of what the OSCE could do is to keep on addressing the issue, because that's the first answer to this question, how to address the issue of political prisoners. To address it. It must be addressed. We have to continue talking about it. In resolutions, in declarations, there have been quite good language on this in previous OSCE Parliamentary Assembly resolutions. But due to the persistency and increasing gravity of the problem, I think the OSCE should step up and make use of further tools, like maybe appointing a special representative on the issue of political prisoners. You could ask the OSCE to initiate a study of the problem of political prisoners in OSCE participating states. There could be ad hoc committee who work to address the issue. And there could also be that some of the existing special representatives, such as the one on the civil society engagement, on fighting corruption, also could touch upon the problem of political prisoners. Because some of the political prisoners are actually representatives of civil society, and they are obstructed to interact with the OSCE. So that is a problem which already can be addressed by an existing mechanism. And then I will conclude with also saying that each and every OSCE participating states have a lot of possibilities to address the issue. Speak about it. Recently, the US and the Swiss ambassador said one political prisoner in the OSCE region is one too many. So this kind of open public speak about the problem, I think it's very important. Of course, you can bring it up in bilateral talks. Countries can support legal aid streams. We are doing that, and we urge others also to do it. And there are other more tougher mechanisms like Magnitsky sanctions. There's a big discussion in the EU. Should EU have Magnitsky sanctions? My answer is yes, and they should use it also to address the problem of political prisoners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gunnar, and also thank you for being so concrete and presenting several recommendations. It would be good also for the other panelists to actually comment upon those proposals that were mentioned here. I now give the floor to Vladimir Kara-Murza, the situation in Russia, please.
Thank you so much, Bjorn. Thank you very remarks. I want to first of all thank the Norwegian Helsinki Committee for organising our meeting today. Thanks to the Lithuanian mission to the OSCE and the Lithuanian delegation of the Parliamentary Assembly for hosting us. And thank you especially to Mantas Jakimavičius of the Lithuanian mission for also organising, putting together this event. 45 years ago, in 1975, the Nobel Committee, for the first time ever, awarded the Nobel Peace Prize to a Russian. Also, of course, Andrei Sakharov, the great Russian dissident humanist and human rights figure. He was not allowed by the Soviet government to travel to Oslo for the ceremony. But in his Nobel lecture, which was read out at Oslo City Hall by Sakharov's wife, Elena Bonner, he asked the Nobel Committee to consider that all prisoners of conscience in the Soviet Union share with him the honor of the Nobel Prize. He listed in that lecture 126 names. This was not a full list. This was only those cases that were known to Sakharov, but it did give an idea. Today, according to the Memorial Human Rights Center, the most respected human rights organization in Russia, there are 311 political prisoners in the Russian Federation. This is not a full list either. Only those cases that the Memorial has studied and vetted in great detail, and only those who correspond to that narrow definition that Gunnar alluded to that was established in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe Resolution 1900 from 2012, and later endorsed in the Baku Declaration by the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly as its own definition. 311. It's not a full list, but it also gives an idea. It's a very diverse group of people. It includes journalists, civil society activists, human rights advocates, participants in peaceful street demonstrations, adherents of prohibited religious groups, and members of so-called undesirable organizations. This list includes, for example, Konstantin Kozlov, of whom Maria Ismak, his lawyer, will speak in more detail in a minute. He was a participant in last summer's demonstrations in Moscow against, in protest of the removal of opposition candidates from city elections. That was his only crime, and he received 4 years in prison for it. This list includes Alexei Pichukin, the longest-serving political prisoner in Russia, who has been incarcerated since June of 2003, for nearly 17 years. He was the first person arrested as part of the well-known Yukos affair, and he remains the last hostage of the Yukos affair. The list includes Yuri Dmitriev, a leader of Memorial in Karelia, a historian, who has worked to document mass burial sites from Stalin-era executions. He's in prison today, awaiting trial. The list includes Dennis Christensen, citizen of Denmark, one of the leaders of the Jehovah's Witnesses organization in Russia, a religious group that has been officially prohibited by the Russian government. As far as I know, there have only been 3 governments in history that have officially prohibited this organization. The first was the Third Reich, announced in Germany. The second was the Soviet Union. The third is Vladimir Putin's Russia. The list includes Anastasia Shevchenko, an opposition activist and a single mother from Rostov-on-Don, who became the first person in Russia to be criminally charged for belonging to an undesirable organization, in her case, Open Russia. And after last week's court verdict in the city of Penza, the list also includes young people from the so-called network case, SET, who were convicted of belonging to an imaginary, non-existent organization that only exists in the minds of the Russian authorities after confession obtained through torture, documented torture, incommunicado detention, and other forms of ill treatment. And those young people were given prison sentences ranging from 6 to 18 years. If I even just mentioned every name on that political prisoner list, we would be here for a very long time. What all these people have in common is that their continued incarceration violates one of the most fundamental commitments the Russian Federation undertook as a member of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and is a commitment to ensure that no one is subject to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile, as provided by Article 23 of the OSCE Vienna Concluding Note. It also violates Russia's other international obligations, under membership of the Council of Europe, for example, under Article 5 of the European Convention of Human Rights, or Article 9 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which we of course also are a party as a founding member of the United Nations. In some cases, this continuing incarceration violates not just general obligations that our country has undertaken, but also very specific international rulings. For example, the case of Alexei Pichukin, whom I mentioned, the longest-serving political prisoner in Russia, who's won 2 cases against the Russian government at the European Court of Human Rights that found in both cases violations of his right to liberty and security and his right to a fair trial under Articles 5 and 6 of the European Convention. the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, and the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has specifically demanded that the Russian government immediately release Alexei Navalny. All of those rulings, as you will not be surprised to hear, are completely ignored by the Russian authorities. One of the fundamental principles of this organization, and I want to quote this directly, this is codified in the 1991 Moscow document of the OSCE, states that, and I quote, issues related to human rights, fundamental freedoms, democracy and the rule of law are matters of direct and legitimate concern to all participating states and do not belong exclusively to the internal affairs of the state concerned. End of quote. Is one of the basic and most important principles of the OSCE that when a participating state fails or is unwilling to uphold the high standards of human rights and the rule of law enshrined in the third basket of the Helsinki process, the OSCE as a whole needs to step in. One of the most important authorities of this assembly, the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, is its authority to conduct oversight through the appointment of rapporteurs or special representatives. Just yesterday, in this very room, we were present for the launch of a long-awaited OSCE Parliamentary Assembly report on the circumstances of the assassination of Russian opposition leader Boris Nemtsov. And we're profoundly grateful to the author of that report, the Vice President of the Assembly, Margareta Sederfeld, for all the work she has done over this past year. The OSCE Parliamentary Assembly currently has 9 special representatives on issues ranging from combating human trafficking to fighting corruption to working on gender issues. I think it is high time that this Assembly appoints a special representative to address the growing crisis with politically motivated imprisonment in OSCE participating states, a scourge, a growing scourge that now affects countries from Russia to Turkey to Belarus to Azerbaijan to Uzbekistan to Kazakhstan to so many other participating states, as my colleagues will be speaking about in a minute. 2 weeks ago in Strasbourg, at the winter session of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, 43 parliamentarians from 16 European countries officially introduced a motion to appoint a rapporteur to address the issue of politically motivated imprisonment in the Russian Federation. I hope this Assembly follows the lead and follows the example and institutes its own oversight mechanism, whether by appointment of a special representative or a rapporteur or a commission of inquiry or whichever form the Assembly chooses best. But our hosts are asking us to talk about specific outcomes of this, and I think the first specific outcome, as Miller has also mentioned, would be the institution of such an oversight mechanism to address this growing problem in a growing number of OSCE participating states. And the second practical outcome I think would be important is to have a strongly worded resolution at the upcoming summer session in Vancouver, a supplementary item, that will not just condemn in very strong terms, I hope, in general terms, the problem of politically motivated imprisonment, but also mention specific cases and specific names of specific political prisoners across the OSCE area. Irwin Cotton, the former Canadian Justice Minister, one of the world's most prominent human rights lawyers, has once written that a political prisoner's worst nightmare is to be forgotten. I think we must do everything we can to make sure that they're not, and that this institution steps forward to seek justice and accountability internationally for those who are deprived of justice at home. And I hope that, talking about my own country, I hope that the Russian Federation's continued membership in the OSCE serves not only to stroke the egos of official Russian so-called parliamentarians whom you see walking around these halls yesterday and today, and to provide them sanctions waivers for trips to Vienna and Vancouver, but also to actually protect the rights and freedoms of Russian citizens, as this institution is intended to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. It's always very inspiring to listen to you. Thanks. We move on to Maria Kreisman, Russian lawyer, presenting her report defending legal systems. Please.
Hello to everyone. It's very difficult to compete with this brilliant speech of my colleague. I don't know what I have to tell you now. Rather move to the very details that I've used myself probably to add to this very good and precise overview of the situation in Russia. Every Friday in Moscow, you can see now, those days, the scene as following. Near the access of metro of people, most of them young, but not only young people, would gather, and one of them will have a placard with the slogan something like, no, we have peaceful prisoners in Russia, please do something about it, sign the petition, please Google this case or that case, and a huge queue of other people waiting for their turn to stay with these one placard near the entrance of the metro. This is called metro picket. This was something organized this summer, or even in the autumn after the summer protests, by the people who wanted to draw more attention of the other people that maybe watch TV or are very busy with their affairs, to the extremely hard situation with politically motivated discrimination of people of their political views, with imprisonment of people for nothing, for just going on the street. And why is there only one person with a placard and they are queuing to take their turn? Because this is the only way to protest so-called legally under the law of law number 54 that says that you don't have to take authorization from authorities if you are just one person with one placard. If you are two people with two placards, you have to write for the authorization. You have to say, I would like to come there and protest against the pollution. And you will most likely get the response, no, it's not possible, because that will be too dangerous for the traffic that is going around, or maybe for the people that probably will be going on the work or from their work. So unfortunately, you will not be able to do this here in the center of the town, but you can go somewhere in the forest outside Moscow. There's a nice place under 3 trees, and you can protest there if you want. So the thing is that the practice in Moscow, for example, is that it's highly unlikely that you will get authorization to protest. Rarely you do get that. For example, the march in memorial of Boris Nemtsov murdered 5 years ago is authorized because it's too big of an issue, and they didn't have enough strength to say no. Some of the rallies are authorized, but rarely. Usually you get the response, no, unfortunately, this will prohibit people to go easily on the streets, even if you are 5, 6, or 7. And so there's queues, and there's one person with a placard. This summer, the new generation that I witnessed a lot, because I was working all the summer as one of the lawyers who participated in the help on police stations where people who were taken from the streets were detained, then all of them were judged, and all of them were found guilty. Nearly all of them were found guilty, even those who were just were not taking part in those events and were just walking around, and they were caught. 3,200, I think, around more than 3,000 for sure, people, most of them youngsters, most of them male, were detained this summer on the streets of Moscow. And all of them tried, found guilty of violating this law because they took part in an assembly that were not authorized by the local city authorities. They were protesting against the ban from oppositional candidates to take part in the election of the Moscow State Parliament. And all of them were tried, and the courts would, in the vast majority of the case, never listen to their witnesses, even though the witnesses were brought to the court. They would never see the videos showing that these people were not violating whatsoever, they were just going around the street. They would not call for the policemen whose reports were the same, word by word, only the surname of the person was written inside, but then they were all the same, saying that they were violating the rules, etc., etc. They will not even call for those witnesses. And in 10 minutes, the court case, guilty, 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 etc. This is not very big deal because, okay, fine, they paid. Some of them spent 2, 3, 5, 10 days detained in a special detention center for those people accused in administrative violation. But then some of them went to real prisons and were tried in criminal courts. For example, Konstantin Kotov, the name that I already heard, and this is one of the people I defend. He's a 34 years old IT technologist, Moscovite, who really could not stay at home when he saw the injustice, and so he was protesting against the politically motivated, trials. He was supporting Alex Sentsov, the film director, was released, Ukrainian film director, caught in Crimea prison terrorists, spent 5 years in prison. He was protesting for Tatars of Crimea also. He was protesting against the torture that already was mentioned. And please do Google the network case, DLSCT. People were really severely tortured. Those tortures were never really investigated. Now they got huge terms of prison. And Kodak also went to his placard to protest against this. So he was caught several times, was detained several times, and then finally charged with repeated violation of this regulation of public gatherings, and got 4 years in prison. During the court, we brought first time 15 witnesses, from which only 5 they appeared, but in the sentence they only listed their names, but not what they said. Although the other witnesses of the accusation side were all policemen, they listened to them and they said that this is all okay. They didn't look at the video tape, and this is often happening in Russian courts. So please, when next time you hear that Russian court convicted someone, please notice that when we say court in Russia, it's not the same as when you say court in the countries that you represent. Because this is the place where everyone understands everything, and you say, this is white, and they say, well, okay, all decided this is black. Next question, next one. Number of activists have done this research and found out that all these hundreds of people that were convicted over the summer protest, the court decisions can be found on the internet. It's free to be found on the internet. And there are 8 templates used for court decisions. All hundreds of court decisions, each of them is word by word one of the templates of the 8 templates that were used and then given to the courts. So all of them is copy-paste. It's a copy-paste. And then we have people convicted. And so they are convicted once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th time you have this, what court have. This is a criminal case already. You face a real prison, not only a fine or something. This is about the gathering, the free gathering. It's nearly impossible to get authorization to go free and protest against injustice that you see, against the pollution of the air, against the poor state of health, whatsoever. It doesn't matter. If you are considered as someone that is going to protest against something that the authority says is okay, you will not be able to do that according to the law. And then you go on the street, you can face the consequences that I've already described. So what I'm saying is that if we talk about, I was asked to talk about tendencies. We have 2 tendencies. First of all, it's a rather grim picture of repression that are, yes, targeted repressions, not real repression of everyone. Not everyone is repressed. You can post something, dozens of people post the same thing on the Facebook, but only one is charged with something over this, with organizing an event by posting a post on the social network. But then again, the repression that is there, including some really severe cases of torture and huge injustice that is faced not only by people politically, political reasons, but any kind of person that is charged under a criminal court will most likely face this injustice. Even if he's guilty or he's not guilty, nothing to do with court. It's just if the case is brought to the court, the prosecution worked, the investigator decided you are guilty, of course you're guilty. You will not be brought here if you're not guilty. So, but the other tendency that I also want to talk about is the really rate of conscience in the society. A lot of people that I'm proud to talk about as oppressions, they want to change this. They don't want, they want to be represented by somebody independent in the parliaments, in all sorts of power structures. They want to help each other. They don't want this injustice. They want, and they are trying, and they are fighting for those who are imprisoned. And they are signing petitions, they are going streets, they are writing in the media, they are trying to do whatsoever, and trying to do it according to the law, just not to violate whatever rule, just really trying hard, for me too hard. Sometimes I think, come on, well, I would, if my child would be dead from the lack of medication, I will not, try to ask for permission to go somewhere. But this generation of youngsters, not only youngsters, there are people of my age and other ages, a lot of people, there are more and more of them want to live in a democratic, normal society. And it's unclear what will happen now. You see, because this is like really important period that I can feel is very important. Because the power said that talks to the society with the repression, and the civil society is active part, is trying to respond with like peaceful protest, but consistently and repeatedly telling that they don't want to live like that. A few days ago, several bookshops had closed for one day, and they wrote on their doors that they are closed because of this incredible injustice that happened to the youngsters from this SET, the network of people that were convicted and before torture. So this is also, please Google, I don't have enough time, and I have one of the defendants in this group, the New Greater, the group of New Greater, Norway, Village, also the criminal case that was manufactured by the secret services and accused people, a group of people that were discussing politics. They are now accused of organizing the extremist society. And you have the leaflets that saying like the fourth term of Putin is end of Russia. You have the linguistic experts that provide that. There's no call for yes, I'm finishing. There's no real call for extremism here, but together with what they discussed in the other places, yes, we will say that they've done something. They've tried to overthrow Putin with violence or whatever. You have Rostov case, 2 young people that went on the street with one placard, and they've got 6.5 years. So there's a lot of really easily motivated criminal cases that we try to that we try to work with to help people as we can. Yes, I guess I ran out of time. We are ready. If any one of you would like to have more details, we are ready to give you this, to provide with documents and proof. All the words I'm telling here, I can prove with all the documents I have, and there's much more that unfortunately don't have time to talk to you about. But please note that Russia is not only people that work here that represent number one. Russia is a country that is full of people that really want to be, peaceful, friendly, nice, and to be with this world.
Thank you very much, Maria, and I'm sorry for being a bit strict on the time. From Russia, we move on to Azerbaijan. Olga Shamshur-Friedel from the Mission Helsinki Committee will present the situation in Azerbaijan today, please.
Thank you, Bjorn. For years, if not decades, Azerbaijan has actually managed to suppress international criticism on widespread human rights violations and political persecution at home by applying what later became known as the caviar diplomacy. The revelations about this type of corruptions and scandals that it provoked has hopefully put an end to this practice, but unfortunately not to the presence of the political prisoners in Azerbaijan. The January PACE resolution that Gunnar has mentioned earlier has stated clearly that there can no longer be any doubt that Azerbaijan has a problem with the political prisoners, and that these problems are due to systematic and structural causes. During the recent years, the European Court of Human Rights has also issued a great number of decisions against Azerbaijan, including 7 decisions where the violation of Article 18 is found, urging the authorities to release all the unjustly imprisoned activists activists and opposition and religious minorities representatives, journalists, bloggers, and other critics. And indeed, for about 1 year ago, in March, the Azeri authorities have released about 50 such prisoners, but many more dozens of those remain in jail. And also, since the last year, we actually see a new trend where the authorities are replacing these long trials and long prison sentences with very short police detentions on administrative charges. These detentions are usually followed by confession and then release. But most of those confessions are extracted under torture. The problem of the torture in police detention is quite widespread, and also the one that authorities reject and do not investigate. Those lawyers that defend their clients and try to talk about these issues, they become targets themselves. In fact, the lawyers in Azerbaijan during the recent years, they're finding themselves increasingly under repressions, harassment, criminal proceedings, and disbarment. Because once a lawyer is disbarred, they cannot no longer represent their client in the courts. So this is a very effective strategy of silencing and stopping the independent lawyers that are brave enough to take the cases that are politically sensitive or the cases of the human rights activists. And also, as Gunnar mentioned, the problems of political prisoners do not even stop after they have been released. For those that have been released conditionally, they are today under travel bans and also have restricted access to their banking accounts, like in the cases of journalist Kadisha Snegola and the lawyer Intikam Aliyev. Many activists actually, even though they were never in prison, also are under travel bans under the pretext of being a witness in some or other investigation that can be dragged out for years and years. But maybe the biggest problem with the political prisoners in Azerbaijan is that of political participation. And we also could see that during the snap elections, 9th of February, where some of the prominent human rights activists and opposition figures like Rasul Jafarov and Ilgar Mammadov, they couldn't put forward their candidacies because the Azeri authorities, they refused to quash their convictions, and this is also directly refusing to implement the judgments of the Grand Chamber. The OSCE observation mission has found quite serious and widespread violations during these elections, including serious violations during counting and tabulation, which actually puts a question about the honesty of the results. So this demonstrates that the Azerbaijani authorities are actually willing to go quite far in order to restrict the participation of the opposition and activists in a democratic process. So in this regard, the case of Ilgar Mammadov is quite telling, because for the last 7 years he has been excluded from 5 elections, and also potentially he's also excluded from all the future elections to come. And the extraordinary infringement proceedings which were initiated against Azerbaijan on Ilgar Mammadov's case and the subsequent judgment of the Grand Chamber, they actually make Azerbaijan today the only country where it has been judicially proven that it is not fulfilling its commitments as a member of the Council of Europe. And of course, this poses a very unpleasant question, which is that if these mechanisms do not work, so if these protection mechanisms do not work, so what is the value of the European Convention? And of course, you can say that when other countries also see the behavior of Azerbaijan, and when they see that there's no real answer, there's no retaliation or punishment for that type of behavior, then they also behave like that themselves. And in this light, the case of Ilgar Mammadov and other activists in Azerbaijan, they're relevant to the Europe as a whole because also they're relevant to the European security in the end, and also to the sustainability of the European human rights mechanisms. So from our side, on the recommendation side, firstly, on the recent elections, the OSCE should urge the Azerbaijani Central Election Commission to adjudicate all the complaints that were made by voters and by political parties and observers and candidates on and previously and after the election day. And also they should annul the results in those constituencies where there were found serious violations. Further, President Aliyev should be urged to find as soon as possible a new date for re-election in those constituencies, and also there should be an investigation and the prosecution of the most serious violations. There were mentioned here a few suggestions about the special rapporteur. We see it actually as quite fruitful if OSCE would resume its trial monitoring missions to Azerbaijan. Because some of the trials, especially those on administrative cases that we have seen last year, they are really ridiculous. They last for several minutes, and police testimony is often the only witnesses in these cases. Further, the OSCE representative for media freedom should also step up its monitoring and speaking up about the violations in Azerbaijan, and also engage better in the dialogue with Azerbaijan.
Thank you very much, Olga. The last speaker in the panel, Ilhan Yusuf from the International Federation of Human Rights, will present issues from Central Asia. Please.
Thank you very much, Bjorn, for giving me the floor. I was asked to speak about all of Central Asia, and unfortunately I don't have much time to cover 5 countries, so my presentation will be a little bit superficial. I will, however, focus a little bit more in depth on Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, and to a lesser extent on the other countries. It's very disconcerting also to hear the remarks of our colleagues from other regions, other countries of the OSCE space. They're very critical, and rightly so, because as human rights defenders and activists, it's our job to point out what the governments are doing wrong so that they can improve their human rights record. So, but we also have to give credit where credit is due. So it might surprise you that I will start with some positive remarks when we talk about Uzbekistan, because since the coming to power of President Shavkat Mirziyoyev after the death of a longtime dictator Karimov in 2016, it's true Uzbekistan has released around 50 political prisoners, and among other reforms, liberalizing reforms, including in the sphere of economy, but also rule of law and human rights, we saw greater oversight, parliamentary oversight. We've seen some of the restrictions on freedom of expression being lifted, some attempts to reform the justice system. There have been reportedly names removed from the so-called blacklists maintained by the authorities. But as Gunnar had mentioned previously, just the mere amnesties of political prisoners does not mean justice. And the political prisoners that have been released have not been rehabilitated in law or in fact. Now, what does that mean? The prisoners that have been released, they have not had their convictions quashed, except for maybe a handful. They have not had material compensation for the harm that they've suffered. They've not had medical, psychological help for the torture and ill treatment that they've endured while in prison. Some of those detained have been in prison for decades sometimes. And I'm talking about human rights activists like Azam Tarbunov and Azam Farmonov, independent journalists like Sarajan Abdurrahmanov, and opposition activists like Muhammad Birjanov. Some of these individuals have managed to challenge their conviction in court, only a handful successfully by obtaining a trial, but others have had rulings that have said basically that all charges have been proven. So they were just released without any further actions to actually rehabilitate them in law and fact. And I might remind, of course, everyone here that the right to an effective remedy is firmly entrenched in international law and the commitments, OSCE commitments. In addition, those that have been released have and continue to fight for the advancement of human rights in Uzbekistan are unable to do so as part of some kind of formal structure. So, for example, Azam Tarbunov, Azam Farmonov, and Dilmurov Saidov, the recently released political prisoners, have not been able to register their NGO Restoration of Justice, which would fight for rehabilitation of other political prisoners, after 7 attempts already. And the refusals have been based on completely formulaic grounds, such as absence of a comma or a sentence not written in the right place. And some of them are still continually harassed by the security services because some old habits do die hard, and unfortunately we see that they're not able to practice human rights to the full extent possible. I'm going to try to kind of weave in some of the recommendations that we would make in connection with the cases that I bring up. Perhaps it would be useful to have some kind of guidelines elaborated for rehabilitation of political prisoners by the OSCE, or perhaps that could be part of the toolbox that you had referred to earlier. I'm glad to announce, however, that the FIDH is starting a project in Uzbekistan to work precisely on this issue, on the issue of creating conditions conducive to the adoption of a legal framework or a commission for the rehabilitation of political prisoners. Now, we aim to do that, and the focus is here on those that have been already released, but obviously there are still those that are still in prison. I'm going to mention those in a few seconds. The way we want to do that is by drawing recommendations from the practices of states who had previously undergone political transitions and adopted some kind of a framework for rehabilitation of political prisoners, and drawing on the context, the local context in Uzbekistan, providing a recommendation for a state on what kind of legislation the state could adopt. Within the framework of this project also, we would like to provide some kind of a platform for a fruitful exchange between representatives of the civil society and the OSCE. And perhaps this could be done on the sidelines of events like the HDIM, which of course is very much frequented by representatives of the civil society from all OSCE member states. We strongly believe at the FIDH that implementing such a rehabilitation program would send a reassuring signal to the international community and also domestically, of course, that the ongoing changes are genuine and systematic, and that Uzbekistan is on a firm path to democratization and fulfillment of its OSCE commitments. Now, while the focus of the project is on the political prisoners that have been released, I would be remiss not to mention the cases of individuals that remain in confinement for questionable motives. There are hundreds that are still detained for their religious views. And with all the positive changes that are taking place, there are examples of individuals that have been detained post-2016. A case, for instance, of Uzbek diplomat Kadir Yusupov, who was an ambassador of Uzbekistan to this organization, who was detained in December 2018 after a suicide attempt. This individual suffers from a psychiatric disorder, is charged with espionage and charged in a closed trial not so long ago, and convicted by a military court in a process that raises a lot of questions as to its compliance with international fair trial and due process standards. Now, turning from this more or less positive example to countries that are exhibiting trends of worsening situation with respect to political prisoners, in Turkmenistan, the situation is so tough with respect to any political freedoms that there is even no information regarding how many political prisoners there are at the moment. But of course, the enforced disappearances and torture gave very grave cause for concern. In Kazakhstan, the authorities responded to widespread peaceful protests following the resignation of Nursultan Nazarbayev last year with sweeping crackdown and detentions of up to 4,000 individuals in just 3 days from June 9 to June 13 following the elections. One of the protesters, I think you might recall a case of one protester holding nothing but a blank poster who was detained. In August 2019, a court sentenced 8 individuals for having participated in an online discussion for propaganda of terrorism and inciting hatred, despite a lack of evidence as to them having promoted any violent extremism. They were just exercising a moderate form of Islam. And the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Counterterrorism who visited the country in 2019, has remarked that Kazakhstan should amend its overbroad laws on terrorism and extremism that target civil society and religious groups. In Tajikistan, the situation is very, very alarming, especially as of late. We have sources close to the Federation that tell us that the number of political prisoners is over 400, and of that number, 136 have been added in just the last 2 months. Many of those have been detained, have been beaten and tortured. Most of those detained have been members of the Islamic Renaissance Party of Tajikistan, but not only. There are also independent journalists and the lawyers who defend them, these activists and journalists, namely Vladimir Yorov, who defended 13 members of the Islamic Renaissance Party after their ban in 2015, who was arrested and charged of trumped-up charges of fraud and forgery and sentenced to 28 years. And after the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention decision opinion stating that his detention and trial violated fair trial standards, calling for his release, these recommendations, of course, were ignored. And lastly, even in Kyrgyzstan, which has exhibited something of a positive trend in the last decade with respect to human rights, we remain concerned about the case of Azerbaijani Askarov, the well-known human rights defender who was arrested after the inter-ethnic violence in 2010 in the south of the country. Although the Human Rights Committee has ruled in 2016 that his case was politically motivated, violated fair trial standards, and called for his immediate release, he remains in detention. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, and his health condition is very, very grave. And we know that on the 25th, so next week, there will be a Supreme Court hearing on his case. So we'd like to urge those present to encourage Kyrgyzstan to observe fair trial standards with respect to Azerbaijani Askarov's case and to carry out the recommendation of the Human Rights Committee. I think I'll stop here, and to the extent that there are some recommendations, maybe you want to elaborate more.
Thank you very much, Ilya. We have been through the presentations in the panel. We have less than 15 minutes left, so I do open up for questions, short comments. Please introduce yourself, and if possible, it will be good also to have a comment from you on the suggestions that we came up with. You're not obliged to do that, but it could be interesting. Please, gentlemen over there. Yeah, you.
Thank you. Introduce myself. My name is Martin Mesmaker. I'm from Belgium. I'm new to this organization, and I'm very glad that this issue is brought up because it's something concrete to tackle. I'm new to this organization, but I'm not new in politics. Of course, I've been a member of national parliaments in Belgium and of European Parliament last term, together with my good colleague, who is also here, Dariusz Rosati from Poland. We've worked there a lot on the issue of political prisoners, notably in Russia, where the situation is urgent. Not only Russian, but Russia is, of course, was in the center of our activities. As you rightly say, every political prisoner is one too many. The difference, of course, between the European Parliament and this organization is that in the European Parliament you talk and you make resolutions about Russia. Here you talk with Russia because they are in the same room and you do your interventions, and that makes an important difference. So our job, I think, in the first place is to speak out, to make them absolutely clear that we care about the issue, that we take it very seriously, that we know the names and that we know the situation well. That is very important. We should give them a name, as we did. We gave the face to Oleg Sentsov. We nominated him for the Sakharov Prize in the European Parliament. He got the prize, he couldn't take it, he couldn't receive the prize, but he's free. We had some successes, so it is possible to have some successes. Just to appeal, we take the very interesting recommendations very seriously. I think we should take it to all good colleagues with us and be ready to work together. I'm still figuring out how to do this for me, because I'm on due to the work we did on blacklist. I'm not allowed to travel to the Russian Federation. So this is very there's a handicap if you work in this organization, but we'll see how that goes. One more thing. It might be strange that I say this, but we also mention, of course, other countries, including some EU member states like Hungary and Poland, very right so. But don't forget that there is another country where there are political prisoners, where people, because of their political activities, have been sentenced up to 13 years, including civil rights, civil society leaders, that other politicians have been forced into exile, including to my country, that they have been sentenced for rebellion and sedition, where they have never committed any violent crime whatsoever. I'm talking about Spain. If you have to take, regardless of what you think about their opinions, the fact is there that the population of Catalonia perceives that there are political prisoners in their country, and so we should look into every case. I think we have. There has been a long detention of these people, arbitrary detention. Look at the United Nations Committee on Arbitrary Detention and what they say about this. We should have no taboos, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much for constructive and interesting comments. On a personal note, I'm a persona grata to Russia myself, so I do understand the difficulties that you are on. You are also, yeah, so I have you on the list, and then the two of you after that.
Thank you, Peter Gardner, from Scotland, part of the UK delegation. Yeah, first of all, I agree with what my friend said. I know it's controversial, but if I invite members spend enough time to go back and look at the definition of political prisoners that this organisation has accepted, and then look at the proven facts of what happened in Catalonia before, during and after the referendum of 2017, and then look at the television coverage of the trials that our colleagues as members of Parliament do, and then go back and look at the definition we have adopted, I don't think it's possible to avoid the conclusion that there are politicians who are being held as political prisoners under our definition in a member state of the European Union, in a member state of the OSCE. And I say that not to belittle the awful abuses of human rights that are happening in other member states of the OSCE. I think it seriously weakens the credibility of OSCE in demanding reforms in mainly the former Soviet bloc countries if we appear to be blind to the similar, lesser abuses happening elsewhere. And I also need to mention, I'm very grateful to Mr. Karamusa for reminding us of the fundamental principles of OSCE. And I can't get the words exactly right, but he said, issues of democracy, human rights and the rule of law do not belong to individual member states. In the United Kingdom, which claims to be the mother of all democracies, a stated aim of the UK government is to remove all foreign external international nuclear legislation. Now, it doesn't mean the UK is going to start rounding up political prisoners, but the United Kingdom doesn't want to be subject to international courts. We're withdrawing from the European Court of Justice. We don't want to have domestic legislation and domestic judicial processes interfered with in the fairness by foreign governments. And I think we have to ask ourselves, is this consistent with the fundamental principles of the OSCE? Is it consistent with the essential independence of judicial process from political interference that the biggest and most powerful country represented here as a president who makes public statements about criminal trials while they are still in progress? These are questions that are not easy to look up to, they're not easy to answer, but we have to take them on board. And it doesn't matter who we criticise. If we're not prepared to criticise our biggest and most powerful members, then we're not right to criticise anything else.
Thank you very much. I now have the two of you on my list. Did I see you? Okay, so I think we have 4 very short comments. It needs to be short because we have to end by within 5 minutes, and we have the final word from our UN friend here. So please, 1, 2, 3, 4. Very short. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm Vincent of Azerbaijani, American friend based in exile. Yes, you mentioned, thank you all. You mentioned Azerbaijan, but I would just try to add, we have more than 100 political prisoners, and compared with Russia, which has 145 million population and 300 political prisoners, I think Azerbaijan is one of the terrible countries with a big number of political prisoners. Vladimir mentioned issues with the political murder. For the last 15 years, we have 5 murder cases of journalists. We have many people which died in prison, and still less attention for this. Our recommendation for OSCE member states, especially for like Italy, which is recently have a chairmanship in OSCE, they have hosted yesterday our president, dictator Ali, which has received ruling power from his dad, and he's innovated our constitutions and appointed new constitution without any presidential terms limit. Today he's trying to organize the next referendum to deliver president position to his wife. It's upcoming next couple of months, but we will see this. And situation when kleptocrats able to using your financial bank systems to launder his billions. We just call to OSCE member states, please, first of all, you need to implement sanctions against them. Don't give them any chance to use your financial system to bring this money. All mentions issues with the Lukova loan there, which has received only 3 million to bribe few politicians in OSCE or in Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly. It's very heartbreaking for me just to find reliable words and talk for a couple of minutes. I hope also our friends able to discuss this later, issues with political prisoners in Azerbaijan. We have a similar segment of political prisoners yesterday. We have a video record in YouTube. You can see with our speaker what we said there. Thanks again for very important event. For the future, I will just have a small recommendation to invite also the panel human rights defenders from Azerbaijan, because we have many brave people, and I think they need international platform like this to express themselves. Thanks again. And if any one of you guys have additional questions regarding political prisoners in Azerbaijan, I'm here until the end of the day, and with pleasure to have the opportunity to meet with you. Thanks again.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry for.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Short.
Yes, one short note and 3 short questions. First, number of enforced disappearances in Turkmenistan. Document was 121. It's available online for the campaign, which I represent. My name is Olga Zakharova, Freedom Files and Book Their Life. Most of these cases might be considered either politically motivated or on religious grounds. with overall cases in 20 years amounting to about 500, but that's what we have documented. Now, regarding Azerbaijan, as one of the people who actively helped to uncover Azerbaijani, we know that this number of political prisoners and violations in elections and in human rights in Azerbaijan would be impossible without corrupt politicians. So far, we know about investigations really taking place, with criminal investigations only in Germany, with some attempts in Belgium. Unfortunately, OSCE Mariani now is in the European Parliament. Mr. Shidadati is now running for the mayor of Paris. So do you know of any other investigations taking place on this? Second, do you know if any Azeri officials was actually designated for Magnitsky-type sanctions? Did that ever happen? And regarding the last elections, was there any fake election observation this time?
Anyone here in the panel would like to comment very quickly on that? Otherwise, I think we in fact have to end there. We have a strict time limit. You have to go to your meeting, and we have a concluding remark by Mr. Kasunas. So I think it will stop there, unfortunately. No, it's 1 minute left. I give the floor to you. Thank you very much, and thank everyone for being with us. Sorry for being strict on the time. That's how it is in this organization. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to you for being here with us during this side event. Thanks. Please.
Okay, thank you very much. I have some things to say, but they will try to be quickly as possible. First of all, yes, we are very glad to be part of this discussion. The biggest question for me after the discussion, what we can do. We have a picture, but okay, what we can do. We yesterday also talked here after the presentation of the report, the president talked what we can do. Of course, the common actions, common directions. There are such kind. Maintain political pressure on countries to fully comply with international human rights standards. Continue to call to release all illegally detained. Call for the implementation of decision of European Court of Human Rights regarding violations of human rights and of detained persons. Unite our efforts in highlighting the names of all political prisoners arbitrarily detained and maintaining their cases on the table until they are free. It's common directions. Practical things. For example, in OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, we can think about, yes, I heard this interesting idea of special rapporteur on political prisoners, for example. Why not? We can do it. Another, I heard the interesting initiative from members of European Parliament. It was several years ago, and it was on the situation in Belarus. The group of maps from different political parties, from different countries, from right to the left, decided to select everyone in the map, to select one of the political prisoners, and take care of him for long years. It means monitor information, meet relatives, write letters to official authorities, even go to these countries and meet them personally, speak publicly, and maybe we can do the same here and propose that. And the last thing I mentioned yesterday, but I will mention one more time, it's to have possibility to show the people who are abusing human rights what can be some sanctions for that. So we have this in Lithuania, we have so-called Magnitsky Act. Also, all three Baltic states have United States and United Kingdom, and it means that if you are abusing the human rights, fundamental human rights, you can be have travel ban. Travel ban, not to go to one another country. Maybe you can raise this question in the whole EU. It will be very good deterrence to deter from possible abuse of human rights. So several ideas. Thank you for the
Thank you again. One last sentence from me, what I can promise you is that my organization, the OSCE, together with our partners, will continue working on this issue. And we will try to cooperate with some of you on how the issue can be pushed further within the OSCE. Thank you very much. Thank you.